Hello everyone, this is my first Photoshop video tutorial, finally. Now this wasn't meant to be the first tutorial, as this is a more advanced technique, but a friend of mine wanted me to show this technique in action, so I'm doing this mainly for her. But in the next video we will go back to basics, and they will progressively get more advanced as time goes on. Okay, so this tutorial covers the frequency separation technique. Basically what we'll do is we're going to separate the image in two parts. One will contain the shapes and the colors, and the other one is going to contain the texture and the definition of the image. The frequency separation is that it allows us to fix skin blemishes, for example, without messing with the color, which results in a more professional look without all the blotchiness that we sometimes see, and vice versa. We can fix the coloration or homogenize the skin tones without ruining the texture. Very well, so I have an image here and it's opening camera raw, and I already made all the adjustments I wanted to make. But in order for frequency separation to work, we need to be working in 16-bit mode, because we need the higher depth of pixels. Otherwise we're going to get ghosting in our image, and that's not going to work for the frequency separation, at least. Okay, so we click on this blue text at the bottom. These are the workflow options, and all we need to do is change this. It's usually going to say 8 bits. We change it to 16 bits, and we click OK, and then we open the image, and it's going to be in 16-bit mode. I already have it open, so I'm going to click cancel, but you click on open image. Now if you are not working on a raw file, if you're working on a JPEG, you're not going to have the camera raw options unless you open from Bridge or whatever. But anyways, so if you want to change it within Photoshop and not necessarily from camera raw, all you have to do is go to image mode, and then image mode, and then you go to 16 bits, and you'll have it in 16 bits. Now one thing I recommend to do before we do all the frequency separation, before we start with the technique, is to do just a very basic cleanup. What we're gonna do is just clean up anything that is too obvious, or sometimes there's dust in the camera sensor or in the camera lens. We fix that just to have a basic cleanup. Just don't go into detail yet. Let's see. And that's pretty much it. I don't want to go. I didn't want to clean that one because it's close to an edge, and that will be actually be better with frequency separation. Okay, so now we have our very basic cleanup, and it's gonna depend on the image, obviously, how much you're going to do very basic cleanup. Also, depending on your workflow, if you're planning to do any reshaping of the body, either by using Liquify or the warp tool, you might want to do it right now, unless you already do all that at the very end. What I do normally is that I do it before doing any color grading or any creative coloring. So my reshaping or my liquifying is actually kind of like at the middle of my workflow, so it doesn't work necessarily that well when doing the frequency separation, because I have to make a stamp of all and combine all the layers that I done with all the work that I've done so far, and it works, but then it's semi-destructive, because then I could not go back and fix anything else without having to re-separate the layers and the frequencies. So I will do it right now. I'm not gonna do it for the purposes of this tutorial, but just it's something that you should have in consideration. Again, it depends on your workflow. Anyways, let's start with the frequency separation. We do it by first making 2 copies of the background layer. So it's Command J twice, or Control J if you're on a PC. Now just for cleanup purposes, let's create a group, and we select those layers, Command G on a Mac, Control G on a PC. Now let's name this layer is gonna be the low frequency, and this layer is gonna be the high frequency. So name the low and high. And this group it's gonna be just frequencies. Okay. Now let's hide the high frequency, just to let us work on the low frequency. And command 1 to zoom in 100%. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply a filter, we're gonna apply a Gaussian blur. And obviously the amount that you're gonna apply of the Gaussian blur is gonna depend on the image resolution, on the image itself, if it's a close-up, a headshot, a head and shoulders, or a full body image. It's gonna depend. It also depends on personal preference. Once you get more into it, some people like to blur it just enough so they can still see some of the skin imperfections on the skin, on the image, and some like to blur it just so you cannot see them anymore. Again, it depends of the purpose of the final image and of your retoucher personal preference. So I actually already did this before, so I kind of know what I want. I'm gonna select for this image a radius of 4.5, and I'm gonna select OK. Now I'm gonna make the high frequency visible. I have a high frequency layer. I go to image, I go to apply image. Now in here, these numbers are not going to change what we're going to do in the apply image, and regardless of the image, regardless of how much you do the Gaussian blur, these are always going to remain the same. In the source dialog, we're going to have select the low, which is the low frequency, which is why it's important to name them. So the layer low, or whatever you name your low frequency layer, and channel RGB, it's okay. We're going to select invert. Blending mode, it's on add. Opacity 100, scale to all this on check, offset 0. These are always going to remain the same. These are constant numbers and selection and options, always going to be the same for every image. And now we're ready. We click OK, and now we change that blending mode of the high frequency layer. We change it to linear light. Okay, so let's see what we've done. If I unclick on this icon for the group, it's going to hide both layers. So it's going to hide the high and the low frequency layer. And if I do, you will see no change. You're supposed to not see any change in the image. We haven't actually done anything yet, only separate the image in those frequencies. So let's hide both the background and the background copy, and we'll see we have the image. If I turn it off, I lose everything. Now I turn it back on, I turn only the low frequency, and we have this blurry image. Now if I turn only the high frequency, we have this gray, and I don't know how well it's going to be the compression of the video, but you're supposed to be able to see the image. If you cannot see it you're supposed to be able to see a texture. If you can't see it on the video, you will be able to see it once you actually apply this. Okay, so we're showing these both frequencies, have everything on. Now what we can do, we can start working on the high frequency, and it's only going to affect the texture because we have the high frequency selected. We have whatever tool you prefer to use to heal the skin, and we need to work on current layer only for this to work. When you're doing the frequencies, only when you're doing the high or the low frequency, you need to be working. You need to make sure that the alignment and the sampling, it's only on the current layer, so we can start working on texture. And right now I don't care about color. I don't care about what color it is where I'm sampling from. As long as it's a good texture and it's a similar texture, I can sample it, and it's gonna work really well. Here's an example. I can, if I wanted to, I could clone the lips in here. As you see, I'm only doing the texture. There is some bleeding of the color, some minimal bleeding into the high frequency layer, not too much, but as you can see, it's almost only the texture. Okay, of course we don't want to do that, so we're gonna go step back. Now let's do some basic cleanup. I might speed up the video in here. Let's see, let's go. Now in here, for example, there's a place where she has a pimple right on the edge, right on the edge of her eyebrow. This is a place where if we were also dealing with color, it will be a problem. But since we're not, we can just sample part of her skin back in here, and then just a little bit of the eyebrow back in here. Now we still have that pinkish color. That's because it's in the low frequency, and as you get more used to this technique, you will be able to distinguish what portions of the image are in what frequency, in what frequency, I'm sorry. Okay, well, so far so good. We might need to come back again because some of the blemishes are actually on the low frequency layer and not necessarily in the high frequency. So what I can do now is I can go to low frequency, I can uncheck the high frequency, and if you can see, there is some patterns that are forming that have formed on the texture of the skin. But since we're not supposed to have texture in here in the low frequency, we can start fixing it, and we don't have to worry about losing texture or losing detail, because the detail always in the high frequency layer. So we can do something like, for example, select different portions of the skin, and when I do this, I usually have a feather selection. In this case, it's 10 pixels. It's mostly all the time gonna have 10 pixels, and I select parts of the skin that will have parts of the face, for example, that will have the same kind of texture, because we have so many different, I think something like 30 or 40 different kinds of texture, different types of texture just on the face. So I select, for example, only the cheek. Then I can apply a Gaussian blur in here, and just subtly, we have to watch the borders. The borders start getting a little bit darker, and like that, and then you will be able to see the difference if you didn't have the margin ends. So just be cautious of that, and just soften up the skin just a little bit. Okay, now you can do this on a new layer. You can duplicate the low frequency layer, and then do the adjustment, and then lower the opacity of that adjustment if you want to. You have to duplicate the layer if you're doing this. I think so. You cannot add a new layer to the high frequency layer. Whatever you do on the high frequency layer has to be on that layer. You cannot add a new layer, but you can do it on the low frequency when you're doing something like a spot healing or cloning or any kind of healing on the frequency, on the low frequency, but not when you're doing this kind of selection. Okay, so we keep cleaning up, and sometimes it might be the same amount, and it usually isn't. That's why I don't go to the filter and then the medium just on the Command F shortcut, because sometimes it's not the same, and instead of saving me time, it ends up wasting me time. So Okay, and we could just the skin and this, just smoothing the skin. Gaussian blur here. Gaussian blur, yes. Okay. Now that's an example. This mode was an example of something that is in both layers. We had texture on the high frequency layer, and we had color on the low frequency layer. So all I do is just use the spot healing, and I might have to do it several times. And just remove that. Okay. Now whatever we do on the face, I have to do on the whole body. That's what sometimes breaks a photo retouch. We see the perfect face, and then they didn't do well on the arms or the other parts of the body, because all the time they spent just on the face. They forgot it, they didn't pay attention to it. But so it's important to do everything the same. So, and I keep my selection of the edges. If I need to go in further closer to the edge, I'll go back just to the edge and do it. But I try not to touch the edge, because then it's not gonna work very well, because it's gonna soften the edge too much. So, and you also need to be careful with banding. Sometimes banding occurs when we're doing the Gaussian blur. Banding similar to the one that we see when we do a gradient. So we have to be careful that sometimes I combine the median filter when doing this kind of technique. I combine the median filter with the Gaussian blur, so I apply a little bit of both, and that reduces or sometimes eliminates the banding. Right now I'm not showing banding, is not showing on the photo, which is good, something that has to deal with. So let's work in this edges. Now let's soften that out. There is a great example of how frequency separation helps a lot, because I can just soften that roughness. Sometimes that would have been much more complicated to do without the frequency separation, because we will be also dealing with the texture. So, and I might have to do it several times, and even apply median filter. So we go to noise, median, weight. Okay, now we apply filter, blur, Gaussian again. And that's better. Okay, I'll click OK. And see, I have that edge to deal with now. I'm gonna see how it looks when I have the high frequency layer on. If not, I can just paint it in, or just clone areas of this piece, this portion. I have better color. And I'm actually going to get rid of that wrinkle. So let's select, blur, Gaussian blur, and yeah, let's get rid of the wrinkle. Okay, now go back to the face, turn on the high frequency layer. Now we have very good skin that looks more professional. Now if I hide it, this before and after, and I need to before and after, and overall before and after. We clean up the skin with it really easily, and it looks professional. I went too fast on portions like here, close to the hair, because of the purposes of this tutorial. But if I had more time, I would do it more carefully. Now we can clean up this. Oops. So let's go back, step back. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm on the low frequency, high frequency. Yeah, you have to be careful with the frequency that you have selected. Okay, so let's zoom out, and we need to fix in here. Okay, so let's fix here. Okay. So anyways, that is frequency separation. We have 2 layers. We have before and after, and that is just one thing that you can do with frequency separation. It opens the door for many things. For example, we can have layers in between the low and the high frequency. We can, for example, fix or change the color of the lipstick, and it will remain below the layer that has the texture, so it's easier and looks better. So we can sample, for example, we can sample from the makeup on the eye, and let's reduce the size, let's zoom in, and I'm just painting regular brush on normal mode. And we are below, and we're going to change the blending mode, but just to show you that we're still below the texture. Even though we are above the low frequency layer, we're still below the high frequency layer, so we can still paint in below the texture, remain the texture remains intact. And I'm using a Wacom tablet, by the way, so some of this stuff might look easy how I'm doing it, just because I'm using a Wacom tablet instead of a mouse, so it might take you a little bit more time if you don't have one. Anyways, now I can change, for example, the blending mode to color, and then I still don't like it, so I can duplicate that, then make one to overlay. No, I don't like it. Just overlay, yeah. Let's delete the color layer. So I changed the blending mode to overlay. Now I can change the opacity. Not that one, this one. And of course I could have done a much better job at the lips, just to show you you can do it, and it's going to remain below the high frequency layer. That is one way of changing the color of the lips. And we can do several other stuff. You can change fix hair, just changing the high frequency and then just doing some basic coloring like I did on the lips, up below the high frequency. So anyways, there we have it, and I can show you a before and after of the body. Before and after, we kept the texture, we smoothed out the skin. As you see in the before, here we have some red spots that are usually caused by the sun. Everybody has them, but now with this technique we reduce them, we remove them, and we still have the texture, because those belong in the low frequency layer, and the texture remains in the high frequency layer. Now at this point you might be familiar with high pass sharpening. Well, we can do that in just one easy step, because basically the high frequency layer is an inverted high pass layer. We only had to do it manually because of the ghosting. If we didn't do it manually, we will have some ghosting, so that's why we had to do it manually. So anyways, we can go to brightness and contrast, and especially this image, because it has some sort of soft focus on it. It's not as sharp as I would love it to be. Anyways, brightness contrast layer on top of the high frequency layer. We clip it so it will only affect the high frequency. Now we increase the contrast and we're going to increase the sharpness of it. And then of course it has a mask, so you can mask out portions of the image that you don't want sharpened. But anyways, this is the frequency separation. It's not that complicated as it sounds. Of course you can do a much better job than I did, especially because I was rushing just for this video. Anyways, I did another version of this image before, and with the frequency separation, and the only thing I added was some basic color correction at the end, and this is my final result. Again, doing the frequency separation technique, and the only thing extra besides the frequency separation was the color adjustment, color gradient, and stuff like that. So anyways, I hope this was helpful in some way or not. Thank you.